In the words of a great American and warm friend of Britain, Franklin Roosevelt, the only limit to our realization of tomorrow will be our doubts of today. So let us move forward with strong and active faith. And ladies and gentlemen, happily and conscious of the honor that is ours tonight, I ask you to join me in a toast to Her Majesty the Queen. To the Queen.
Hi, I'm Melissa, and welcome to this month's Live From at the Reagan Library. Remember, we do these on the first Wednesday of every month. With the recent passing of Queen Elizabeth II, we thought we would spend today's Live From talking about the relationship between the Queen and President Reagan. They had more than a relationship. They were friends. They truly enjoyed each other's company. But first I'm going to talk about the gallery that I'm standing in now. I last came to you from this gallery in November of 2020 when we were closed to the public due to the coronavirus pandemic. Here in our Flights of Freedom gallery, we showcase how President Reagan used face-to-face diplomacy to promote freedom and democracy around the world. During his 8 years in office, he used Air Force One as a tool for this face-to-face diplomacy, flying over 661,000 miles. Aboard Air Force One, President Reagan traveled to 26 foreign countries and over 150 cities in the United States. And one of those places he traveled to was Great Britain. In 1982, June of 1982, President and Mrs. Reagan flew on board Air Force One for a diplomatic mission to go to Great Britain. And while there, on June 7th and June 8th of 1982, they visited with the Queen, as well as with Prince Philip. At a dinner in their honor that night, President Reagan said that our two countries share more than just a common language. He said that our values and beliefs and principles of government were nurtured on Great Britain's soil. And then on those days as well, Queen Elizabeth and President Reagan went for a horseback ride on the grounds of Windsor Castle. And Prince Philip and Mrs. Reagan followed behind in a horse-drawn carriage. In his autobiography, An American Life, President Reagan talked about all the different things he got to do as president. He talked about all, the ups and the downs, the diplomatic missions, and how some of the things he got to do were just fun. And when he was listing the things that were just fun, he talked about his horseback ride with the Queen at Windsor. In his autobiography, he continued to say that his time with the Queen and Prince Philip just showed how warm they were, they had a welcoming hospitality, and that they were very gracious. Then, just a year later, in late February and early March 1983, the Queen and Prince Philip came out to California for a 10-day trip. They were supposed to do the entire 10-day West Coast trip aboard their royal yacht, the Britannia, but a torrential rainstorm actually kept them from being on their yacht most of the time. On March 1st, 1983, President and Mrs. Reagan hosted the Queen and Prince Philip at their ranch, Rancho del Cielo, in the Santa Barbara Mountains. Now again, they couldn't use the yacht, so they flew in via plane to the closest airport and then drove the 7 very windy, very muddy miles up to Rancho del Cielo. When the Queen finally arrived, President Reagan went up to her and apologized for the weather and apologized for the drive, and the Queen just laughed and said, "Yes, it's dreary, but it has been such an adventure." President Reagan had hoped to take the Queen on a horseback ride at Rancho del Cielo to say thank you for their time at Windsor Castle, but due to very poor visibility, they weren't able to do so. Just a few days later, the weather cleared up. The Queen and Prince were back on their royal yacht, and they invited President and Mrs. Reagan on March 4th to join them on the Britannia. Now, March 4th was President and Mrs. Reagan's 31st wedding anniversary, and they celebrated on board the yacht, and the Queen and Prince Philip actually gifted President and Mrs. Reagan this silver engraved box for their 31st anniversary. It is here at the Reagan Library. In his diary that night, President Reagan called it a very magical evening. Now, over the course of his presidency, they continued to spend time together, write notes to one another. President Reagan was in Great Britain and saw her in 1984 and in 1988. But their relationship even continued post-presidency. In fact, in October of 1989, just about 10 months after he left office, The Queen and Prince Philip hosted President and Mrs. Reagan back in Great Britain, and the Queen actually bestowed an honorary knighthood on President Reagan. She bestowed upon him the Royal Order of the Bath, which is the highest award someone from Britain can give a foreigner, and the Royal Order of the Bath is actually on permanent display here at the Reagan Library. President and Mrs. Reagan had the utmost respect and admiration for Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, and it was with heavy hearts and great sorrow that we learned of her passing. We send our thoughts and our prayers to the entire royal family, and as well as to all of the British people. We want to thank you for joining us. Until next time.
We have enjoyed ourselves and greatly appreciate the warmth of your hospitality. What will remain afterwards is more significant: the cementing of a relationship. From time to time, friendships must be publicly reaffirmed. My visit has given me the opportunity to reaffirm the ideals which we share and the affection that exists between our people, without which the formalities of alliance would be meaningless, but from the certainty of which our two countries continue to draw strength. Mr. President, I raise my glass to you and to Mrs. Reagan, to the friendship between our two countries, to the people of California, and to the people of the United States. Mr. President.